The fact is that we were more exposed than the larger countries. We were more vulnerable because these three banks had run up these liabilities, which, as I said, were 10 or 12 times our annual GDP. So that is something we should have regulated, but didn't. Yes, you can say it was greed, it was complacency, it was over-exuberance. But the fact is, we did not realize and we didn't know what was happening.
Would it be correct to say that Iceland is bankrupt?
No, I think that would be taking it too far. The banks, the banking system was definitely on the verge of bankruptcy. But these were not debts that had been run up by the government. In the year 2007, I think public debt was about 27% of our GDP. This year, 2009, we are expecting this debt to go up to 109% of our GDP.
No, but if your banks have got liabilities which are 10 times or 12 times the GDP of the country, then somebody has to pay for those liabilities. And ultimately, I mean, in the United States, there's a bailout, and the bailout is being funded by the taxpayer. Who is bailing out Iceland? There was a rumor that you were being bailed out by Russia. Is that correct or not?
I knew you would say that. Yeah. What we did was to negotiate a standby stabilization arrangement with the IMF. We borrowed some 800 million US dollars in December, and over the course of the next 2 years, we are going to pocket maybe another $1,200 million. So it will take us to $2.1 billion from the IMF over the next 2 years. This we have done in order to, first of all, stabilize the currency, because if we cannot stabilize the currency, we cannot have price stability. Up to a third of our consumer price index comes from imports. So we cannot plan economic recovery unless we stabilize the currency. The currency came down by 60% in the span of a week in October. We have a very volatile currency called the krona. This is the first part. The second part is to restructure the banks. We are evaluating the assets of these banks that went belly up, and we are selling them. What we feel is most important is to be able to honor the commitments that these banks made to depositors, not only in Iceland but also abroad. Thirdly, we need to consolidate our fiscal policies because we are going to see a very sharp fall in revenues over the coming years because there will be very low corporate profits and low earnings. There's going to be growing unemployment. So the government is not going to be able to take in the same amount of revenue we have in the last few years. And we have to cut government outlays and raise taxes. And in fact, we are imposing a wage cut on all government employees, including ambassadors at the United Nations. So everybody will have to pay for this. And it's going to take years to get back to normal. But with the goodwill and understanding of the IMF and our friends and neighbors, we will get there. We have negotiated loan arrangements with our Nordic friends and some other European countries. And to answer your question about Russia, yes, the Russians have offered Iceland a loan. They started out offering us, I think, it was 4 billion euros in November. That's because that's before the price of the oil barrels started going down. When we last heard from them, they were offering us 400 million euros, a fifth of what they had offered us in November. But we have not negotiated this loan. No, we have not taken the bait. We have not borrowed from the Russians. But it is good to know that we have friends also in Moscow.
Okay, let's talk a bit about your foreign policy. Start with Scandinavia. Are you a Scandinavian country? What's the language that you speak in Iceland? Is it Swedish or Norwegian or Danish or Finnish? Culturally, do you fall in the same family? Do you have family links? Do you have marriage links with Scandinavia? Do you vote with Scandinavia on issues in the UN?
It's a fairly closely knit community. The language we speak in our country is really the same language that used to be spoken all over the Nordic countries about 1,000 years ago. We are a Nordic country, by the way. We are not part of Scandinavia, but a Nordic country.
What is the difference?
Well, Scandinavia would be the peninsula extending from, Finland to Sweden through Norway, whereas Denmark and Iceland would not be part of Scandinavia as such, if you want to be, literal about it. Now, the language we speak, as I said, is the Old Norse that the Vikings used to speak when they first settled the island in the 9th to the 12th centuries. And what has happened since then is that the other Nordic countries that are so close to the other European cultures have moved away from the old language. They have adapted their languages more or less to other European languages and to one another. So that today, Icelanders can go to the other Nordic countries and understand them and read the newspapers, but they cannot understand what we are saying, which is not bad. It gives us an opportunity sometimes to eavesdrop on them. But we have close cooperation on social and economic affairs, not so much on political affairs, because we have different loyalties when it comes to foreign policy. Iceland and Norway, for instance, are not members of the European Union, whereas Finland, Sweden, and Denmark are. And Denmark, Norway, and Iceland are members of NATO, whereas Finland and Sweden are not. So we normally would not coordinate joint Nordic policies on security and defense, but on anything having to do with social affairs, culture, and economic affairs. And we have a common labor market, for instance.
Yeah, but tell me a bit more about the European Union. I would have thought that the European Union experiment was so attractive that you would like to be a part of the European Union. What holds you back from the European Union? There's money to be made in Europe.
Well, our independence in the early 20th century was hard won, and we are very jealous of it.
Independence from whom?
We won our independence from Denmark in 1918. We were in royal union with Denmark until 1944, and then we declared Iceland a republic. And from that time, many people have been reluctant to pool our sovereignty with that of other countries in the European Union. And there's one specific reason for that. I mentioned earlier that we base our livelihood mainly on the resources of the sea. The resources of the sea account for 60% of our foreign currency earnings and about 40% of our total trade volume. So we depend on these resources for our livelihood. Now, if we were to join the European Union, we would have to relinquish sovereign control